All right. Well, first question is, our team has just started exploring triggers, woo, and our automations. Can you share how we could better use them overall? Okay, this is definitely a best practice question. Eric, I believe this one is yours.
It is. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, this is definitely a best practice type question. And I think it's totally dependent on what you and the team are trying to accomplish, right? The first thing we need to do is kind of take a step back and figure out the use case and say, is this something that should be action-based, where it's, if somebody emails me, send it to the right group? In that case, let's use a trigger, right? Or is it something that's going to be time-based, where it's, hey, my customers haven't gotten back to me in a couple of days. How can I send them a nudge? We'd want to use an automation for something like that. Being in management, I got to think about it a little bit differently than just the business case, but also think about it from a people management side of things too, right? Where it's, hey, what if my team hasn't responded to a customer in a couple of days? How can I stay apprised of that and make sure that I can coach and better expectation set with them to provide better customer service, right? So in a situation like that, I might build out an automation that says, hey, if this ticket isn't updated in 2 days, send the managers an email, right? And just say, hey, by the way, here's a ticket that hasn't gotten a customer update. I would also say too, triggers and automations can also help tie into any external systems you might have through things like webhooks. So it really is entirely dependent on what you're trying to accomplish. My overall best practice, though, is as you start your journey on business rules with triggers and automations and everything like that, have a clear game plan on what you and the business are trying to accomplish. We have a lot of questions that have come in that we'll either address through later questions here or offline to try and get to everybody. But having a clear-cut plan and having a clear roadmap as to what you're trying to accomplish will really set you up for success. Because as you'll start getting into it and get further down in your adventure, you'll start to see how they can all be interwoven, and changing one thing can have a ripple effect to 14 other business rules. So I think a clear-cut or a clear plan, a clear roadmap is more valuable than the business rules themselves.
Awesome, Eric. Thank you so much. All right, Dave, can you move on to our next question, please?
Sure thing.
Okay, to review and organize my triggers, I'm planning to use trigger categories, but is there anything else I should do before enabling that? That's a pretty good question. Travis, I believe you have an answer on that for us, correct?
In terms of the question here, we actually got quite a few questions that are pretty similar to this in terms of organization and people wanting to make sure that they keep their ducks in a row as they build their account out. As the company grows and therefore your account grows, you might create a lot of triggers over time, and that's definitely daunting. And so organization could play a very key role for you here. Organization is going to be important for a lot of reasons. Like if you have only one person maybe that deals with your triggers and somebody else is taking over, you want to keep them in the loop. We have a way to kind of help with that transition. If you have multiple administrators possibly that deal with triggers, I think I have a solution that might help you out here. So kind of to start with this, we have a method that we can use. It's not internal to Zendesk, but we have a way that we can export that information so that somebody is able to kind of organize that information however they need to. So unlike reports or organizations, we don't have an internal way in Zendesk that is native that you can export trigger information. What you can use is use like a trigger list API to get a JSON format of your triggers, and then therefore export that information into a CS or an Excel spreadsheet or something of the sort. And I kind of have an example here that was put together. Let's see here, which one is it? Right here. So we kind of used and this was actually put together very wonderfully by Leanne. So this is something that we see a lot of companies do similar. And I'll say it one more time. This is kind of the list here, a formatted list. And like I said, I don't know what it's going to look like before you necessarily do any formatting. Before, like I said, before you do any of that. But this is kind of what it looks like. You can break it up by your categories. You can color code. You can change the order. We have notes on the very far right side that might be helpful. You can put in, hey, this trigger was created by this agent, and maybe anything else that you need to note in there as well. So I think that kind of covers a good way that you can organize this. If you have multiple admins that are dealing with triggers, you can make sure that multiple people have access to a shared document so that anybody can edit this that needs to stay informed. Because, if you have multiple admins working with triggers, communication is definitely going to be important to kind of keep everybody on the same page there. So that's what I've got for that one.
Perfect.
Awesome.
And then Leanne, you said that you went and helped create this, correct, Leanne?
Yep.
Would it be okay if after the event we went and created a copy of this for users to go ahead and use on their own time and implement their own information into this?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually made this so it's view only, but anyone with the link can access it. So you're more than welcome to use it, make a copy and use it for your own needs. We have been editing this a bit with the examples we're going to use, as we discuss more of the business rules today. So it might be a little bit different, but we did include all of the default automations and triggers in here as well. And then just give some examples of types of notes that you might add. So feel free to make a copy and edit to your heart's content.
Okay,
cool.
perfect.
I just threw that in the chat, a link to that. And I see it is set to so that any of you should be able to see it.
Perfect.
Screen.
One thing I want to add as well, if I could really quick, because I think some of the questions referred to kind of how to use categories in the questions. The categories that you put triggers in don't affect the function of the triggers at all. It's more of just an organization thing so that you keep things categorized how you want them to be. But if you move one trigger from one category to another, it's not going to affect how that trigger works in any way. So it's just a visual thing.
Okay, cool. All right, let me share my screen again here.
Just a real quick a comment that's related to the question from Andrea. She says she may have understood the community question, but I thought they were asking whether or not we need to know something regarding the categories in Zendesk. So one thing I can share about this question is this question came up in the Q&A in a lot of different formats. So this question is kind of answering probably 4 or 5 different questions. And the way that we summarize it here was the best way to summarize all those questions, kind of asking for the same thing. On that note, I don't think that's the case, but Leanne, could you correct me if I'm wrong in that summary?
Yeah, so I understood this question to be, hey, we want to enable categories and use trigger categories. Do I need to think about anything with those? And I think this is kind of what Travis was describing, that the categories themselves don't affect the triggers. Categories are solely used for your own organization. If you've been with Zendesk for years, you might remember the former pre-category trigger list, which would just be all of your triggers outlined. And we would get constant feedback from customers saying, it's really hard to find the trigger I'm looking for, or how can I organize these better? And sometimes customers would create empty triggers just to use as a title. So we use that as an opportunity to say, hey, we need to find a better way to organize these. And that's when trigger categories came out. So categories are only used to help group your triggers together to make it easier to find them, to see them, to edit them, to know what they're doing. Oftentimes what we see our customers utilize and what we recommend as a best practice is to set your categories for what action they're taking. So you'll see in the spreadsheet that we have categories for set, route, and notify. And we do recommend that as the order of events for your categories, because you want to set your fields like adding tags, set a field, set something within the ticket. Then based on those settings, you want to route them to the right group. So that's when you're going to have your routing category to say, if it's a VIP ticket, route this to our VIP support group. And then finally, your notification triggers, which are saying, and then notify all of my agents in the VIP group. So kind of putting a bow on it, hopefully. Categories themselves, again, don't actually affect the triggers. They're just used for organization. But the order of your triggers does matter. So that's really the big consideration for how you're utilizing categories, is in what order am I putting them?
is there a way to automatically make the ticket subject customized when it is received, especially with inbound calls? Leanne, I believe this was your question.
So this is a question we receive all the time in support, saying, hey, when a ticket comes in, I want to run a trigger to automatically update that ticket, either by changing the subject or adding an internal comment to direct my agents to do something. So the specific question we had was, whenever an inbound call comes in, it shows call from caller and then either their name or their number. And, sometimes our agents aren't great about updating that subject line. So is there any way we can use a trigger to automatically update that title? And the answer to this, and why it's frustrating, is yes and no. Is it possible? Yes. Is it natively possible? No. The reason why is that to update the same ticket that is firing the trigger can cause what we call a race condition. So because essentially the ticket itself of like the ticketed creation event channel is talk or incoming call or voicemail, because it's the ticket itself that is then firing the trigger to say, when ticket is created, do this. When the trigger tries to run and update the ticket as the ticket is already being updated, that's what we call a race condition, because what essentially happens is the system tries to fire the triggers as it's simultaneously going through the triggers. So that can cause issues with triggers not running, with actions not firing. So even if it works half the time it might not. Because of this, we don't support this workflow, which is why I'm saying it is technically possible, but it's not natively possible, and it's not something we recommend or something we support. With that said, there is still potentially a way to meet your needs. What you would do in this case is you would create a trigger that says when ticket is updated or when ticket is created, and if channel equals talk, and if subject includes this, then execute this webhook. And with that webhook, you would specify what update you want to have occur with that ticket. So you'd enter the URL of subdomain.zendesk.com/ticket/ID and be like the ticket title placeholder. And then you would actually enter in your JSON body of what update you want to make to that ticket, because you're technically doing an API call with this. But again, because you don't want to update the ticket as it's running to fire the trigger to potentially cause a race condition, what you'd actually want to do is send that webhook to a third-party API platform and then run that script on an interval. So maybe every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes, you try to pull that, or I should say push that request and that call back into your system to then update the title. So again, it is possible, but it's not natively possible. It's not something we support. But because, again, we do get a ton of questions about this, we did want to take a moment to address it. We'll send some documentation. I do think Dave just posted about the, what is a race condition? Why don't we support this? And it goes into it a little bit more. So again, not natively possible, but it is possible via some API scripting and some interval coding with your third-party API platform.
What are some best practices on setting up triggers for different customers?
Okay, perfect. So actually, if you don't do this now and you need to, it's actually pretty straightforward. And granted, there are a lot of ways to do it. You can have tickets picked up by comment text or a lot of different parameters to be able to kind of do this. But I'll show you the most straightforward way, and then you can kind of build off of that. So tags is definitely probably the most versatile way of accomplishing this. So for example, we have an organization created here called Pet Washers. And anything that comes in from a gmail.com address, is going to have this Pet Washers tag. So any ticket that is created that comes from this domain is going to have this Pet Washers tag added. We can create triggers and use that tag as a condition and then assign whatever action we want to it. So for example, we have this trigger set up. Ticket is created. That's going to be important because we only want this trigger to fire when the ticket is created, not for every update or anything like that. So we have it set up so ticket is created. And actually, I'll go back to the other trigger I have set up. I think that'll be a little bit of a better example, just to kind of start off with, if it lets me back into it here. Still getting used to everything being an admin center. So, okay, so we have this set up so that whenever a ticket is created and it has that Pet Washers tag in the ticket, this ticket is going to get assigned over to Leanne, and she can deal with all of the great people from the Pet Washers. And then we also have let's see here. Where's my other example? That's what it was. In this particular user profile, they are part of the organization because they have the Gmail domain. They have the organization set here, obviously. We also have a VIP tag that's along with this user. So whenever this particular user submits a ticket, they should have the VIP tag associated with that ticket, as well as the pet washers tag, because the pet washers tag is a part of the organization, which this user is in. So if we go to one of the ticket examples here, so we'll start with this one. So this ticket has the pet washers tag. So theoretically, it's going to get assigned to Leanne. Now, one thing I wanted to point out here as well is the order of your triggers is going to matter with something like this. So basically what you want to do is you want to start broad. So normally what you would want to do is have this assigned to Leanne above this assigned to Eric, because any tag or any ticket that has the VIP tag and is a part of the pet washers organization should get assigned to Eric. This ticket shows an example of that not happening because those two triggers are out of order. So this didn't get assigned to Eric like it should have, because this trigger fired first, and then this trigger basically took it over because it has that pet washers tag. However, if we edit the order of our triggers here, and then we move this above and save it, now it will work correctly. And then this ticket is an example of that. This got assigned to Eric correctly because this ticket was submitted after the triggers were put into the correct order. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, but tagging is definitely going to be the best way to do so. So with trigger here, we had anything under pet washers is going to get assigned to Leanne. Anything that has the pet washers tag and also a VIP tag is going to get assigned to Eric. And what you can do with something like this is you can have like one VIP maybe from every organization that you deal with, and you can have this VIP tag as an all condition, and then add every organization in your meet any of the following conditions condition. So that's how that would work. Okay, so then if you click the arrow there between 12 and 13, I have a couple rows hidden. You can expand those.
Come on, respond.
I think you might have to drag the arrow. I could be wrong about that. Maybe not. Okay.
No, that's not wanting to do anything for me. I can see the arrows.
Well, why don't you go to describe it without the example, and we'll work on trying to get those arrows.
Yeah, so essentially all I did was add those triggers into this spreadsheet just to kind of show, as you add triggers, edit triggers, obviously you're going to edit this document once you do that so that everything matches up with what you have going on. And then I also put a note.
There it is.
There we go. Yep, and then if you scroll over under the notes column, I actually put a note in there as well that said, hey, this was created by this person on this date, and this has to be after this other trigger, which I didn't put in there. But just an important thing to note that, the orders really matter when it comes to routing and really anything trigger related, because you can definitely have some things take over other things, and then you have tickets getting assigned to the wrong places or the wrong actions are applied to them or whatever the case may be. So that's definitely a big troubleshooting tip is, looking at the order of your triggers as well if something isn't working like you would expect it to. So,
sweet.
Awesome. What recommendations do you have for using triggers to improve our reporting needs?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and this is really going to depend on what exactly your reporting needs are. But I did create a couple of examples that might help point you in the right direction. So, Dave, if you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and just to give like a quick intro, from my experience, when people are trying to improve their reporting, the best way to use triggers to improve your reporting is through tags. As Travis mentioned before, tags is your best friend when trying to keep track of things. So in my example that I'm going to share, we're going to be using tags, and then I won't show you how to create a report on those tags because my reporting expertise is subpar. But I'll show you how to create, these triggers and schedules based on my demo that I'm going to share with you. So I'm going to do share screen. And here we go. All right, everyone see?
Yep.
Good to go? Awesome. So in this demo, the example that I'm gonna use is, say we're trying to track how many tickets are being submitted within business hours versus how many tickets are being submitted outside of business hours. So the first thing in this example is we need to make sure that we are setting up our schedules. So to set up a schedule, you need to make sure that you go to your admin center where everything is located when you need to customize your support instance. And then under objects and rules, you'll see schedules. Give it a second to load. And then we'll add a schedule. And I've already created these schedules, but once you hit add schedule, you can go and you'll see this screen right here. So let's pretend that our normal workday is between 9 and 5. So that's what this is what I consider within our business hours. And yes, I can zoom in. Good call.
Just about to say, a little hard to see the screen. Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so this is the schedule that I created for within our business hours. So as you can see, from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and that's our business hour schedule. And then it doesn't include any time between the weekends and before those time frames. And then my other schedule that I created is outside of business hours, which encapsulates every time outside of our within business hour schedule that we created. So if anybody, for those that aren't aware of how to create schedules, all you have to do is hit that add schedule, and you can select your time box in here, and you can drag and move your schedule around like this. So now that I have my schedules created, we want to create those triggers that will automatically tag those tickets that are being either created within the schedule or within our business hours versus outside of our business hours. So here I'll go back to our business rules and then triggers. And the two triggers that I've created is tickets created within business hours and tickets created outside of business hours. So obviously we give it a title here. And then I've just, as Leanne mentioned, we try to keep our trigger categories around like the action that these triggers are taking. So in this example, I've set the category to set because anytime a ticket is being created within business hours, I want it to be tagged or have a specific tag on that ticket. So our trigger conditions that we'll be using is meet all of the following conditions, is ticket is created. So that way this trigger is only firing as soon as the ticket has been created in your support instance. And then the second condition that we're going to be using is within schedule is business hours. And business hours is what I've titled the schedule that I created for this scenario. So if the ticket is created within those business hours, then I want my action to be set the schedule to business hours and then also add the tag within business hours as shown here. Now for the other trigger that I've created, it's very similar. Anytime a ticket is created outside of business hours, I will use the ticket is created condition. And then under meet any of the following conditions, I want to make sure that if it is within our outside of business hours schedule that I've created, that it's going to add our outside of business hours tag under the actions. I've also added, in some cases, you might have a holiday coming up and you want to track how many tickets are being submitted on a holiday. So that's why I've included within schedule is outside of business hours under meet any of the following conditions, because I want it to include this tag if it's within the outside of business hours schedule that I've created or if it's on a holiday. And then I'm setting the schedule through the actions to outside of business hours, and then adding that tag. And then when you decide to set up your reporting, you can create your reports to say, hey, I want to see the number of tickets that have been created within business hours in this time frame versus how many tickets have been created outside of business hours, just to give you a better idea of, where the high volume is coming from. So that, go ahead.
So I say real quick, we did have kind of a side question on your answer from Andrea. So if we have different time zones, we just add additional schedules. Is that correct? Within business hours, PDX, within business hours, UK, as examples.
Yeah, I would say probably best practice is for different time zones, set up a separate schedule, just because in my experience, it's beneficial if you have separate teams working within different time zones, then you can set that separate schedule and then have tickets route to that team based on the schedule that's been set or when the ticket has been submitted by your user or your customer. So in my opinion, best practice would be to set up a schedule for each time zone that you're supporting. And then Sydney, I saw you also had a question. Is there another trigger you could have that would fire specifically for holidays? Absolutely. You can either set it up in one of the existing triggers if it's within business hours or outside of business hours, or you can just create a separate trigger that fires anytime a ticket is created on a holiday. And it's important to note that it only accounts for future holidays. It won't account for any tickets that were created from a past holiday.
Awesome. These are, by the way, the follow-ups on these questions are fantastic. So if anyone has anything that they'd like to also add while we're explaining these questions, feel free to drop it in here. They only enhance the answers that we'll be able to share with the community later on after the event.
Yeah, and one more note that I'll make is that when you're creating your triggers and you're applying tags to these tickets based on these conditions, make sure that you are using the add tags. It's important to use add tags and not set tags, because set tags will remove any pre-existing tags on that ticket, whereas add tags will keep adding additional tags. I've seen a couple cases where set tags has been used and users are wondering where all their tags are going or why they're being removed from those tickets.
As we are looking to gather information to improve our current system utilizing triggers and automations, could you recommend some best practices?
Yeah, so this again is going to depend on your account, but let me share some resources here. We actually have a lot of, Dave already attached our trigger resources documentation, but for anybody that is new to setting up triggers in their account, I also recommend going and taking our free training, which you can find here. We have a free on-demand training for admins and agents that you can send to any other admins on your account at your company and just have them go through this training. It literally walks them through step-by-step on how to set up triggers, the difference between triggers and automations, and it gives you some examples of when it's better to use triggers versus when it's better to use automations. So I would say that would be a great place to start if you are new to setting those up. Let's see here. And then I also wanted to share one of our fine-tuning posts that go over how to build your ideal workflow. And this is another great resource to go through if you're jumping into triggers for the first time and you're not really sure where to start. It kind of goes and asks you those questions of like, what are your business needs? What are you trying to accomplish? That sort of thing. So it really depends on, what you're using your support instance for. If it's, business to business, business to customer, that sort of thing. And whether it's for like internal employees or for external use, that sort of thing. So I would recommend starting there. I don't have necessarily have a demo to share around that. The conditions I'm using is ticket is created, received at is, our default support address. And then I'm adding a tag based on where that ticket was received from. or I could set my drop-down field that I've created and report on it based on that. So that's just another example of how triggers can help you with your reporting needs.
Thanks, Brett. Leanne, I know we've been trying to troubleshoot some technical issues. Have we been able to resolve any of those? And if not, that's okay. We can go ahead and maybe just move on to some different questions and answer these offline.
I am really hoping so. I did go ahead and re-enabled all of my cookies, reloaded all of my site data, and reset all of my permissions. So I'm really hoping that it's working now. Let's go ahead and try. If not, I think we could talk about the messaging aspect, because I do know Dave has access to that. So we could potentially, instead of just focusing on standard agent interface, we could talk about agent workspace. But cross our fingers. Let's see if we can share screen again.
All right.
Yeah, I have no idea why I keep getting this error.
No, that's okay.
Let's move on just to talk about messaging. I'm going to send Dave the necessary link that I want him to go to. And Dave, I'm going to send this to you. Actually, no, I'm going to send it to you in Slack just because I have you over there.
Oh, yeah.
Once you get done with that, check out my most previous Slack message if you haven't seen it.
All right. So, as I had mentioned about chats are being disproportionately routed, what's going on with that? When you're using the standard interface, that's typically indicative of a department issue or skills-based routing. And that's because any chats that have applied skills are going to be routed to those similarly skilled agents within the department before being routed to other agents in the department. So high-level overview, if you're using the standard agent interface, disproportionate routing typically means one of your chat triggers is likely setting a skill or setting a department, or your agents are not evenly distributed across those departments, because chats will not move from one department to another. Within messaging in the agent workspace, however, you can use support triggers in order to route those messages to the proper groups or to the proper agent. I did send a link to Dave. Oh, but he left. In order to open that up. If someone else can share their screen, I can direct you to where to go. Or there he's coming.
Dave is back. So let's see. I imagine we might be running into a technical issue, unfortunately, today, which is causing screen sharing not to work on a number of computers. For that, we do apologize, everybody, as Dave loads back in. And there he is.
I'm just needing to get myself a password for that account. But it's certainly a lovely day, isn't it?
Oh, it's the best. While we are getting into that, I know we did have a couple of questions come in. So we're going to go ahead and touch on those real quick. I know Aaron asks, are there best use cases for automating tickets through the description of the text?
So the way that I read that is, I guess, looking for maybe like a string of text or something like that to basically, to use as a condition of a trigger. And that's definitely possible. And I guess a recent example I can think of is if comment text from a customer contains, "I want a refund." It can pick up that string of text or even just the word refund, and you can apply, an action or a tag or something based on that. I don't know, it may not be the most reliable method because you're relying on customers to use that exact word or that exact string of words in order for that trigger to fire. So it's definitely possible, but I think it's going to take a lot of adjusting along the way in order to get it dialed into how you want. And as customers are using new terms that relate to that, you'll have to add that to the trigger and that sort of thing. So I think it's definitely possible, and there can be a good use case. It just may not be the most reliable method in certain ways and circumstances.
All right. Looks like we do have screen sharing working. Leanne, why don't we go back and finish up that question? And we'll move on from there.
Yeah, so Dave, if you want to share your screen, just because I'm still having issues with screen sharing.
Oh, no, I think I am sharing it, aren't I?
You were just a moment ago, yeah.
It says I'm sharing it. Can you see the...
Nope.
Can you see anything?
No.
No?
Why don't we go ahead? Again, this might be one we just have to go ahead and...
Okay, hold on. Come on, Bevy. Bevy's lying to me.
Yeah,
Let's
I know
try
you had a
it one
couple
more time.
questions that we were working through. So what we're going to go ahead. Oh, there it is. It is sharing now.
Okay.
Let's
Okay,
try to
great.
get through this answer, and then we'll move on to the next questions in the deck.
Yep, sounds good. So this was a messaging ticket that I submitted yesterday just to show about how you can route messaging tickets within the agent workspace. And this is going to be utilizing standard support triggers. So Dave, I'm going to direct you to where to go to see those triggers. If you go
Great.
up to your product tray in the upper right corner, and we're going to go into Admin Center.
Okay, great. Okay. It opened up a new tab, which is not the tab that I was sharing. So I'm going to get out of there. We're getting there. We're not going to fail here. All right. As Zendesk Admin Center, check. All right. Can you see Admin Center
Yes.
there?
Yes.
Great.
All right. And then let's expand objects and rules and open up triggers. And then I have my 2 messaging triggers under the route category.
Okay. There we go. Okay, under route, check.
And here I created 2 different triggers, one for routing billing and return questions to my finance department, and another to route product questions and any other questions to my my standard support department. If you open up either one of those, here you can see the conditions I used for this. And all I did for meet all of the following conditions was say, if channel is messaging, and then I have a ticket field that I'm using to qualify how my user is reaching out. This is something that you can implement in Flow Builder to ask specific questions to your users before they submit the ticket and connect to an agent. So my question that I posed was, what's the reason for your contact? So my customer can either say, oh, I have a support request, or I have other requests, but you can have a lot of flexibility with the type of questions you need to ask in order to get them to the right person. So here I said, if it's support or if it's other, because it's not billing, it's something unique, then I want all of these to go to my generalized support queue. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, you're going to see I have actions just to set the group to support. Now you could assign these directly to an agent if you have a specific agent who should be handling these requests, or maybe if you are using any API scripting to tag users or do anything really customized. But for the sake of the example, I did a pretty broad demo. And my finance routing is very similar, but I just made that one based on billing questions. So if someone is messaging in, they get to, I want to talk to an agent, transfer me. And I say, great, give me a couple of pieces of information. What's your name? What's your email? What's your reason for contact? Well, if they say, I want a refund or I have a subscription question, then I want to route those to my finance team. Yep, and that's just my route billing and refund request to finance. Very similar to my support questions. Again, I just changed the values for that custom ticket field to say if they're requesting a refund or billing subscription question, go ahead and send this to finance. And although I know it'll take a moment for Dave to go back to the view in the other tab in order to see that ticket, as I mentioned, I did put in a ticket last night where I'd answer the question saying, oh, I have a refund request, or I have a question about my subscription. And then we'll see that in my finance department view I created, we're going to see that ticket lives in that team. So this is a great way in order to route your tickets to the appropriate departments. With messaging, again, we typically recommend creating a view so your agents can quickly go in, grab those tickets, start working with the customer. As it is a messaging ticket, the agent does have to assign the ticket to themselves before they're going to be able to submit a reply, which is why, again, you can either route to a group overall, or if you also wanted to directly assign to an agent for a specific use case, you could do that. So this was the example I had. If you're using messaging in Agent Workspace, great news, support triggers are applicable to you. You can absolutely set those up. You use Flow Builder in order to collect pieces of information to route appropriately, or again, you can use some customized coding as well to set those fields as a ticket.
Hey everybody, if you're joining our video already in progress, you might notice there's a little jump. We did have some technical difficulties, so we're re-recording this answer so that way we can get it to you. Leanne, would you be so kind as to go through your answer that we weren't able to get live during the event?
Absolutely. Thanks, Devin, and thanks for setting this up. So with this question, we received a question saying, hey, I have chat set up, but even though I have multiple agents online, they're getting disproportionately routed. So maybe one agent has 3 chats, while another one has 0. What's going on? How do I fix this? Before we jump into how to make this work for your workflow goals, I do want to just set some quick expectations. Specifically, there are kind of 3 different ways that you may have chat routing, and that's if you're in a traditional, like standard agent workspace, if you're using agent workspace, and if you're using messaging in agent workspace. For the purpose of this question, I'm going to focus on the standard agent workspace, which is when you're going into the chat dashboard, you set yourself to online and you're accepting chats there, as well as how to meet this need when you're using messaging in agent workspace. And that's because that's what our new trials out of the box come with. If you have other questions or additional questions about this, absolutely send us a ticket. We're more than happy to help with you, but I want to focus on the 2 where you're most often going to see this question. So in this case, when we're talking about the standard agent workspace, let's say you're online, you're ready to take chats, you have some chats coming in, someone else chats in and you have a colleague who doesn't have any chats going on. So why are you getting all of these chats? This may come into play with your chat triggers, but is likely rooted in your routing settings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the setup for this before we get into the chat trigger configuration. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have this set up in my test account, so apologies as I get that up. Excellent. We have share screen going this time. So as I said, I'm working in the standard agent interface. So here I'm in the chat dashboard. I'm looking at routing settings. And here we can see that I have my settings set to assigned for routing. What this means is that as a chat comes in, it is by default going to be routed to each one of my available agents in round robin fashion. However, I mentioned a couple of things might change the routing settings that will make one agent receive more chats more than another. And specifically, this has to do with your skills as well as any chat triggers you have set up. So as an example, skills here, I have a few different skills for languages, as well as some skills set up for VIP customers, customers reaching out about subscriptions, or customers reaching out about refunds. What skills will do is say, okay, once I'm routing a chat to an available department, maybe I have skilled agents within that department that can really help with this particular question. So as an example, maybe you have one agent who is solely enabled in order to give refunds. So although that agent is in the finance department, if the question is about a refund, you want it to go to your refund specialist. In that case, we'll use a chat trigger. So when I come down to my triggers, I've already created one to add a subscription tag whenever a user reaches out from one of my refund specific articles that I have on my help center. For this trigger, I have this set up to add a subscription tag. So whenever a visitor loads the chat widget, it's going to check the URL to see if it has a question about a subscription. And then from there, it's going to add that subscription tag and route to the finance department. This subscription tag correlates to that subscription skill. So this means that if I have an agent available who is able to accept more chats and has that correlative skill, this chat is going to go to them first. Now, if that agent, however, is at their max capacity or isn't available, then it's going to go to any agent within the finance department, whether or not they have this subscription. So let's see this in action. I'm already logged in, as we can see, and give me one quick second. I have it set up on my other page to start these chats. But in this case, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to submit a question. And as I submit this, we're going to see that as an agent, I have a chat come in. So I just set this from a random user, have this set to test. And we can see that my specific tag wasn't added. So my skill is not being applied to this specific chat. Now I'm going to say that my other agent is going to come online. We're going to see this back on the chat dashboard and just make sure this doesn't get rerouted. I'm going to add this. But here we can see another agent is online. So as another chat comes in, maybe I would expect that Leanne Britton, my other agent, is going to be able to pick up that chat. However, as I submit this chat, I'm specifically submitting this as another user from my subscription article. When I hit start chat, which again, I'm doing on the other side, notice that I, as the administrator, am still receiving that second chat, even though my other agent is available. And again, this is because I have a trigger set up to apply the specific subscription skill to route to my subscription skilled agent. So again, when we're talking about agents who are receiving a disproportionate number of chats, typically this is due to your chat triggers and applied skills. It is a little unique to the situation and how your account is configured, but I wanted to talk a little bit about where we see this happen most often. So if you're noticing that your agents are receiving more chats than maybe another agent who's also online, I encourage you to just double check what your routing settings are set to, assigned versus broadcast, and see if you have skills applied. If your agents are in the same department, as you can see here, I have 2 in the finance department, and they're still receiving disproportionate skills, or I should say disproportionate chats, that's likely due to applied skills, which would again are applied via your trigger. Again, if you have any other questions about that, absolutely send us a ticket. We're more than happy to help. I know it can be a little convoluted depending on your setup and how many departments and skills you may have. Now, I mentioned I was going to give some examples if we're using the standalone agent interface versus if you're using the agent workspace, which is the integrated agent workspace. So let's shift gears and talk about that. The good news is that when you are using the integrated agent workspace, you can use just standard support triggers for this routing. Like before, we would still set the routing type within our chat dashboard. So for settings, we would just set routing to, again, either assigned or broadcast. Just like before, if this is set to assigned, we should see chats automatically assigned and routed to your agents in round robin fashion. However, if we're using messaging and not chat, then this is going to come from your support triggers to see how those messages are routed. In this case, I'm just going to go into my triggers, and you can see that I've created a couple of triggers here to say if someone chats in and is requesting help with, a billing question, or is requesting support for standard technical support or a general question, well, then I want to route it either to my finance group or to my support group. These settings for how you can determine that information and how you can collect that is done via Flow Builder. And just to give a very quick example, if I come into Admin Center, I wanted to open up a new tab so I don't lose this one. But if I come into my Admin Center, just to again give a quick look at this, I'm going to look at my Flow Builder setup. And here you can see that I have mine set up to say that when I'm transferring to a human, as someone is asking, like, oh, I want to talk to one of your agents, here's where I'm asking what their reason for contact is. And in that reason for contact dropdown field, that's where I have specific questions and answers for. I have a question about a refund or a finance or subscription question or a general support question. And then in each one of these triggers, all I'm doing is saying, okay, if someone is messaging in via the messaging channel, and if their reason for contact is either billing or subscription question or a refund request, then I'm going to set my group to finance group. This will automatically then route these tickets to your finance group where they can then pull them from a view or have them actually show up in the conversation. In my example, all I did was create a couple of views for finance tickets and support tickets. And if we want to test this out, and one quick moment because I do have this up. We'll see I have someone in the queue. I just submitted this. And if I come in here, you can see this just updated when I clicked on it. And then here I have my second ticket. So here's where we can see that a tag was applied from the field. If I look at the event history, we're going to be able to see that my trigger routed this to my finance group. And then as an agent, I can go ahead and just take the ticket, submit as open to hold that assignment. And then I could absolutely just continue the conversation. And that is how you can route your different chats to your different agents, both in the standard interface as well as the agent workspace. Like I said, it depends a little bit on your configuration, but overall in the standard interface, this is going to be based on your chat triggers and skill-based routing. And in agent workspace, you can just use your standard support triggers in order to route to the appropriate group and to your appropriate agents.
All right, our next question is, are there any ways to use triggers to automatically create child tickets using set macros?
Great question. The answer to this, is it possible to use a trigger to start a side conversation or to create a child ticket, is yes and no. The reason I'm saying yes is because you can absolutely create a side conversation or a child ticket directly from the macro. In fact, you don't even need a trigger to do this. So hence the answer is no, because you don't need a trigger to do it, but yes, it's possible. I'm going to show you how you can use just a macro to start your side conversation or create your child ticket, as well as how you can use a trigger to do this as well. So I'm going to start, like I said, with the macro example. Let me share my screen. And in this case, I've already created a macro that's going to start my side conversation. And all I did in this macro is, for my action, I'm going to say side conversation via email. I'm going to say that for my example, maybe I work with a number of vendors or distributors, so I might need to reach out to them for assistance on a ticket in order to actually respond to my ticket. I'm going to say that I typically reach out to them via email, which is why I'm saying side conversation via email. But you can also use a side conversation via child ticket if this should just go to a different group within your support interface. For, again, the sake of example, I'm going to use side conversations via email. I then can specify what the subject should say, as well as the message that should be included in that side conversation. You can absolutely edit this to your heart's content. And if these should always go to the same address, you can also enter that directly, or you can leave that blank if you want to force your agents to enter that each time. Maybe there are different users you need to send this to. In any case, once you have your macro created directly from your ticket, you can use that macro in order to immediately create your side conversation. So again, because mine is set up to email, that's why I see this as a separate ticket. I can enter the address, and then as an agent, I still have the ability to edit this as needed and ask for whatever assistance I need in that side conversation. And again, you can do this as a child ticket as well. My example was just via email. So to answer the basic question, can I use a trigger to cause a side conversation to start from a macro? You can do it directly from a macro. But if you absolutely want to do this via a trigger configuration, for example, maybe all of your macros are already created, they're applying specific tags, and you want to start a side conversation or a child ticket via that tag, you can also do that via a trigger. For the trigger configuration, what we're going to do for this is use a webhook and trigger combination. To start with the webhook, I've already created a webhook to start a side conversation. And for this, I'm just going to hit that side conversations endpoint. So what a webhook is essentially doing is it's saying, okay, post whatever I'm going to send you to this specific endpoint. So for this, I'm using the side conversations endpoint within my own test account. I'm making this a post request. And then in the trigger is where I'm going to send that JSON body for the request. I've entered this as basic authentication using just an API token. Little beyond the scope for this right now, but just showing what we need to set this up for the trigger. And then in the trigger, this is where I'm going to specify that, okay, whenever a tag of start side conversation is applied to a ticket, then notify that webhook for that side conversation webhook I just created. And here's the body of that JSON request I want to send that should be included in that new ticket. And again, for the example or purpose of this example, I'm going to say that my macro I use automatically adds this start side conversation. So instead of editing my macro, I just want to create a trigger that says if a ticket has this tag from the applied macro, then start that side conversation. So back in my account, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just add that tag directly. Again, we're going to say and kind of pretend that my macro did this. So I'm just going to add a tag for start side conversation. And when I submit this ticket to apply the tag, we're going to see that a side conversation was created. And here is where I can see that side conversation, which includes the message body. It looks like this might have fired a couple of times, and that's because of some other triggers I have in this test account. Normally, it's not going to hit this every time. What we just need to do is add a restricting action to say only do this once. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we don't see the ongoing aspect of this, but I wanted to show you specifically how you can use that trigger in order to create that side conversation. And that's it.